She was sitting peacefully in a park, no one quiet, no threat. But one arrogant cop saw a target instead of a person. He kicked her, cuffed her, humiliated her. What he didn't know? She was the FBI agent who could end his career with a single call, and the world was about to see it all. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun bathed the Savannah Park in a golden light that softened the edges of everything it touched. The sprawling oaks stretched their ancient limbs skyward, casting dappled shadows that danced gently on the worn paths. A warm breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the distant sounds of laughter and the faint quack of ducks' glassy surface. The air smelled faintly of pine and earth, a serene reminder of nature's quiet endurance amid the city's constant hum. Naomi Pierce sat on a weathered wooden bench beside the pond, her posture relaxed yet purposeful. At 55 years old, her face bore the marks of a life lived with quiet resolve, lines around her eyes that spoke of vigilance, experience, and an unyielding spirit. Her curly salt and pepper hair was tucked beneath a faded cap, shielding her gaze from the sun. She wore simple jeans and a soft gray t-shirt, clothes chosen not to attract attention, but to blend seamlessly into the natural surroundings. No badge hung from her belt, no uniform announced her presence. She was, at this moment, just another woman finding a brief refuge in the stillness of the afternoon. In her lap rested a worn, leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with the careful script of a seasoned agent's thoughts, observations, and reflections. A pen hovered in her right hand, occasionally scratching out words that gave voice to the quiet stories she bore. For Naomi, these moments were rare, a respite from the relentless demands and hidden dangers of her career in the FBI. Here, the chaos of investigations and the weight of justice faded, replaced by a stillness that felt both fragile and precious. Yet beneath this calm exterior, Naomi's mind remained alert. The peace of the park was a fragile illusion, a temporary pause in a world that rarely rested. Years of experience had taught her to expect the unexpected. She had seen enough darkness to know that tranquility was often the calm before a storm. Even here, in this sunlit sanctuary, she felt the undercurrent of tension that simmered beneath the surface daily life. Around her, the park breathed with quiet life. A young couple scattered breadcrumbs for a gathering of ducks near the water's edge, their soft laughter weaving into the afternoon's gentle soundtrack. An elderly man, steady but slow, shuffled by on a cane, nodding politely but without stopping. The park was a tapestry of ordinary moments, small connections, and fleeting joys, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to descend. The crunch of gravel under heavy tires broke the calm afternoon. Naomi's eyes lifted, instinctively scanning toward the source of the noise, before the black and white cruiser came into view. It rolled slowly down the park's winding path, the engine's low rumble reverberating softly against the surrounding trees. The vehicle eased to a stop just a few yards from where she sat on the weathered bench. The door swung open with a subtle creak, and a man stepped out. Officer Darren Kessler was a presence impossible to ignore. His broad frame filled the space, moving with the unyielding certainty of someone used to authority. The buzz cut atop his head and sharp angles of his face spoke of years hardened by conflict and control. His mirrored aviator sunglasses hid eyes that had likely seen too much, too often dismissing what didn't fit his narrow view of order. Kessler's boots hit the gravel with heavy purpose, each step punctuating the tension he carried into the peaceful park. Naomi noticed his gaze fix on her with cold intensity, measuring her presence as if she were a threat rather than a woman quietly writing in a notebook. "Ma'am," Kessler said, voice sharp and rehearsed, "what are you doing here?" Naomi met his gaze steadily, calm but resolute. "I'm sitting," she replied simply, "enjoying the afternoon." His eyes narrowed, lips pressing into a thin line. "This park has been having problems. Complaints about suspicious activity. People watching children. We've been told to patrol more closely." Naomi tilted her head, voice soft but clear. Is it illegal to sit in a public park now? That question didn't land well. Kessler's jaw clenched, and his tone grew sterner. Can I see some ID? The question came with an edge, a demand rather than a request. Naomi held his gaze, undeterred. She? Because I asked, he said. I don't recognize you. Naomi's eyes scanned the park for a moment. The young couple feeding duck, the elderly man with a cane walking by, but only she was being questioned. No one else was asked for ID. Just her, a lone black woman sitting quietly on a bench. Her voice was steady, layered with quiet disappointment. Is it because I'm black? Because I'm alone? Kessler's expression didn't change, but Naomi saw the tightening around his eyes. This was the moment when suspicion shifted toward something more than duty. It became personal bias, an unspoken judgment that she refused to accept. Die, now, he repeated. Naomi reached slowly for her bag, mindful of every movement. She had learned long ago that quick or sudden actions could escalate tensions unnecessarily. She moved deliberately, aware of the eyes beginning to notice. The murmurs from a distance, the subtle shifts in posture among other parkgoers. Her hands extracted the worn leather case holding her credentials. Kessler's gaze followed every motion, but didn't soften. When the ID hit his palm, he gave it a cursory glance, then pushed it aside. This doesn't mean anything to me. Naomi's eyebrows lifted in quiet disbelief. It means I'm a federal agent. I have every right to be here, to sit, to write, to breathe. Kessler scoffed. I don't care who you say you are. You'll need to come with me. Before she could respond, he stepped closer, the space between them shrinking with his mounting aggression. Kessler's hand moved without permission, rifling through Naomi's bag with rough impatience. Her belongings, wallet, notebook, tissues, small first aid kit were pulled out and scattered on the bench. Then his fingers brushed against the worn leather of her FBI credentials again. This time, instead of pausing with recognition, he kicked the ID case carelessly with the toe of his boot, sending it tumbling near his feet. Pick that up, he barked, tone sharp and commanding. Naomi bent slowly, never breaking eye contact. As her fingers grazed the leather, Kessler's boot shot forward. His kick struck her squarely on the shoulder, sending her reeling sidewise. She stumbled, her hands catching her fall just inches from the hard-packed earth. Shock rippled through the small crowd now gathering nearby. A woman gasped sharply, clutching her chest in disbelief. The young couple stopped feeding the ducks, faces frozen. The old man with the cane paused mid-step, eyes wide. Naomi's gaze locked onto Kessler's. There was no fear, only a simmering fire beneath her calm exterior. What the hell is wrong with you? She demanded quietly, pushing herself upright. Kessler's face twisted in a sneer. Watch your tone, he growled, stepping forward. His hands grabbed her roughly, twisting her wrist behind her back with unnecessary force. You're obstructing, he spat. Naomi's voice remained steady, defiant. I haven't done anything wrong. You didn't comply, Kessler barked as he cuffed her wrists tightly, the metal biting into her skin. A second police cruiser pulled up, its siren silent but urgency unmistakable. Officer Jaime Boyd stepped out, younger, less certain, visibly shaken by the scene unfolding before him. Naomi glanced at Boyd, her eyes silently communicating the injustice she faced. He hesitated, caught between duty and doubt. Kessler barked orders, and Boyd moved forward, his steps slow, reluctant. The cuffs snapped shut. Naomi didn't resist. Her chin lifted, expression fierce but controlled. Phones appeared, onlookers recording, voices murmuring. You don't know what you're doing, she hissed through clenched teeth. Kessler sneered back. You people always say that. The words hung heavy, a reminder of the systemic divisions that had brought them to this moment. You'll regret this, Naomi whispered. Not a threat, but an unshakable certainty. Kessler had no idea who she really was. but soon he would. The sudden slam of the patrol car door shattered the fragile calm Naomi Pierce had clung to just moments before. The harsh clang echoed like a judgment, sealing her fate within the cold metal confines of the vehicle. Her wrists, encased tightly in unforgiving steel cuffs, throbbed with sharp pain. The skin beneath was reddened, the pressure of the handcuffs cutting into her flesh, each wave of writing up her arms. Naomi sat motionless in the back seat, her posture rigid yet composed. She refused to allow this humiliation to break her spirit. After more than 2 decades of service as a federal agent, this was not her first encounter with injustice, but the sting of it still ran deep. Each breath was steady, her mind sharp, despite the simmering anger that threatened to boil beneath the surface. The driver, Officer Darren Kessler, wore the look of a man trying desperately to convince himself that what he had done was right. His jaw was clenched tight, lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes, cold and unyielding, flicked between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, betraying a restless tension. Underneath his tough exterior, Naomi sensed a rising panic, a dawning realization that this moment could unravel everything he had carefully built. In the front passenger seat, a younger officer named Jaime Boyd fidgeted nervously. Boyd's face was pale, eyes wide with conflicted emotions. The hesitation in his movements was obvious. He had seen the unprovoked kick, the harshness of the arrest, and Naomi's dignified silence in the face of it all. Yet his voice remained locked inside, unspoken, while guilt flickered faintly in his gaze. Naomi's eyes met Boyd's in the mirror, steady and unwavering. Without words, she sent a message of quiet strength, a reminder that the injustice unfolding was neither unnoticed nor uncontested. Boyd swallowed hard and glanced away, caught between the unrelenting authority of his senior and the undeniable truth reflected in Naomi's calm demeanor. Kessler finally broke the silence, his tone sharp and clipped. "You're coming with us. No more attitude." Naomi's reply was measured, a calm but firm assertion of her rights. "I have the right to remain silent and the right to legal counsel." The officer scoffed dismissively. "We'll see how long you get to use those rights." Naomi turned her gaze back to the window. The park, once vibrant with golden sunlight and the laughter of children, was now a distant memory. The familiar sounds of nature faded behind the hum of the engine and the harsh reality of her new surroundings. The badge that had been a symbol of honor and dedication now felt like a fragile shield shattered by prejudice and suspicion. The patrol car came to a halt outside a plain, unremarkable building on the outskirts of Savannah. Naomi's destination was a small, isolated substation, far removed from the bustling hub of the city's main police headquarters. The building was austere, weathering gray bricks stained by decades of sun and rain, giving it a worn, neglected appearance. Inside, the air was sterile and cold, heavy with the scent of bleach and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights flickered erratically overhead, casting an unwelcoming, harsh glare on peeling paint and scuffed linoleum floor. The atmosphere felt suffocating, designed more for containment than care. Naomi was led through narrow, dimly lit corridors, lined with rows of empty desks and filing cabinets, their surfaces cluttered with outdated paperwork and scattered coffee cups. The quiet murmur of voices drifted faintly from distant offices, but the hallway she traversed felt suffused with a chilling silence. At the end of the hall stood a heavy steel door. Behind it lay the holding cell, a small claustrophobic room painted a dull, institutional gray, with chipped walls and a single barred window near the ceiling that barely let in a sliver of sunlight. A cold metal bench, bolted firmly to the floor, awaited her like a cruel reminder of the harshness to come. Kessler's voice barked orders with forced authority. "Sit." Naomi moved with deliberate calm, settling herself on the bench. The metal handcuffs bit into her wrists, but she refused to show weakness. Every breath was controlled, every movement measured. She was a rock amidst the storm, her mind racing beneath the surface, even as her face remained stoic. Kessler stood over her, clipboard clutched tightly, his impatience palpable. "Name?" Naomi's eyes met his without hesitation. You had plenty of time to check when you rifled through my bag." The officer's frustration simmered visibly, his grip tightening on the papers. Without a word, he called out into the corridor. "Boyd, get in here, watcher. I need to verify some information." Boyd entered the room, clipboard in hand, looking more uncertain than before. His eyes briefly locked with Naomi's, a flicker of remorse passing between them. He understood the gravity of what had happened, even if his voice was silent. Kessler's footsteps echoed away as he left the cell, the heavy door clanging shut with a finality that seemed to seal Naomi's isolation. Boyd shifted awkwardly, breaking the oppressive silence. "Can I get you anything?" Naomi raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Do you really think I'm going to ask for help while I'm handcuffed?" He swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "Sorry." She leaned back, voice soft but firm. "Have you ever wondered what this job does to people? What it turns them into?" Boyd looked away, the weight of his own conscience evident. "I don't want to think about it." "Ye can," Naomi said quietly, "but you won't." The room held its breath as the silence settled, the moment stretching into a quiet reckoning, between duty and morality, between complicity and courage. Kessler's footsteps echoed loudly down the sterile corridor as he returned to the holding cell, a faint tremor betraying the brittle confidence he tried to project. The radio handset felt heavier than ever in his grip, like a chain tightening around him. His jaw was clenched so hard it seemed it might crack, but there was no turning back now. With a sharp breath, Kessler barked into the radio, his voice attempting to sound authoritative, despite the edge of panic creeping in. "Dispatch, run a full identification check on Naomi Pierce. Confirm status and clearance level immediately." Static crackled from the radio speaker, dragging out a long, agonizing silence. The seconds felt stretched, suspended in a way that made Kessler's chest tighten painfully. In that moment, time slowed, every heartbeat amplified in the quiet cell where Naomi sat, watching him with an unyielding gaze that dared him to deny the truth. Then, the voice from dispatch finally came through, calm but resolute. "Confirmed, Naomi Pierce, Supervisory Special Agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Clearance level, top secret." Kessler's grip on the radio loosened suddenly, his knuckles paling as he stared at the handset, as if it had betrayed him. The weight of that confirmation crashed down like a tidal wave. His smirk vanished, replaced by wide eyes filled with disbelief and fear. The facade of control shattered in an instant, leaving behind a man grasping desperately at the remnants of authority now, slipping through his fingers. Naomi's steady eyes bore into him, unwavering and cold as steel. Her voice cut through the tense silence like a scalpel, precise and merciless. "You kicked me. You humiliated me. You made a spectacle of arresting a federal agent. All of it, caught on camera, witnessed by the world." Kessler's lips parted, but no sound escaped. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, a verdict harsher than any courtroom sentence. The walls of denial and arrogance that had shielded him crumbled under the weight of reality. "You're going to lose that badge," Naomi continued, her voice low but firm, "and you're going to lose it publicly." His voice came out a mere whisper, brittle and defeated. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Naomi snapped back, eyes flashing with righteous anger. "You didn't care to know. You didn't stop to ask who I was. You saw only the color of my skin and assumed guilt." Kessler swallowed hard, his confidence draining away. His eyes darted to the floor, unwilling or unable to meet hers. The gravity of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders, the consequences now undeniable and inescapable. Before he could utter another word, the heavy door to the holding cell burst open with authoritative force. The precinct captain strode in, her presence commanding immediate silence. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, framed a face etched with years of hard-won wisdom and unyielding resolve. Her eyes, fierce and clear, locked on Kessler, without hesitation. "Remove those cuffs immediately," she ordered sharply, her voice broking no argument. Kessler fumbled awkwardly with the keys, his hands trembling as the cold steel clattered onto the metal bench, revealing the raw, red marks that marred Naomi's wrists. The captain's gaze didn't waver as she stepped closer to Naomi. Her voice rang out, firm and unwavering, "Badge and weapon, hand them over now." Kessler opened his mouth to protest, but the captain raised a hand, silencing him instantly. His hands shook uncontrollably as he unclipped his badge and holstered his firearm, placing both on the cold metal table with a hollow, whispering clang. Naomi rose slowly from the bench, every movement deliberate and composed. She stepped forward, her voice calm but loaded with undeniable strength. "You thought no one would believe me," she said. "You thought I was powerless. But the world is watching now." Kessler's shoulders sagged under the crushing weight of public disgrace. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the hollow shell of a man who realized the extent of his downfall. The captain nodded to two officers standing silently nearby. "Escort him out." As Kessler was flanked and led away, stripped of his badge and authority, Naomi remained standing unbroken, dignified, and resolute. She was no longer just a victim. She had become a symbol, a beacon of quiet resistance against abuse and injustice. In that moment, the silence in the holding room was filled, not with fear, but with the raw power of truth finally breaking free. It began with the simple click of a button. A bystander hidden among the crowd in the quiet Savannah park had captured an act that would soon shake a community, a city, and ignite a nationwide conversation. The video was raw and unedited, an unfiltered glimpse into a moment of brutality. Naomi Pierce, an FBI agent known for her decades of service, sat quietly on a weathered park bench. The golden afternoon sun bathed the scene in a deceptive calm. Then, without warning, Officer Darren Kessler's boot connected sharply with Naomi's shoulder. The sudden, violent kick sent her stumbling, nearly falling to the ground. The video showed everything: the initial calm, Kessler's aggressive approach, the unlawful search, the abrupt and unjustified assault, and Naomi's composed yet defiant response. This clip was more than just footage. It was undeniable proof of an abuse of power, one that shattered the illusion of safety many had clung to. No longer could this be swept under the rug. Once uploaded, the video spread like wildfire. It began with local residents sharing it across Facebook and Twitter, but within hours it had spiraled far beyond Savannah's borders. Hashtags like "Justice for Naomi," "Police Brutality Exposed," and "Savannah Speak" trended across social platforms. Influencers, journalists, activists, and everyday people united in sharing and amplifying the story, demanding accountability. The clip was posted on TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Reddit forums dedicated to civil rights and police reform, accumulating millions of views in just days. Every share, comment, and retweet fueled a growing movement. People were not only horrified but galvanized. The imagery of a woman who had upheld the law for over 20 years being treated so unjustly resonated deeply with those who had long felt powerless. For many, Naomi became a symbol, a living testament to the systemic issues ingrained within law enforcement agencies nationwide. Comments under the posts ranged from heartbreak to anger. How could this happen in broad daylight? What kind of man abuses his power like this? If this can happen to an FBI agent, what hope do the rest of us have? The video touched a nerve that many felt had been numb for too long. It sparked heated discussions on race, authority, and justice, not just online, but at dinner tables, in classrooms and community centers. Despite the shock and outrage, many expressed hope that Naomi's courage in the face of this violence might be the catalyst needed to finally bring about meaningful change. Others shared their own experiences of police mistreatment, drawing parallels that made the viral clip all the more personal and urgent. The world was watching, and the call for justice was deafening. As the video's reach exploded, the reactions transcended the digital realm and began to ripple through communities everywhere. The comments, messages, and posts turned into conversations, deep, raw, and personal conversations about lived experiences with law enforcement. Social media platforms became a battleground for truth and solidarity. Naomi was no longer just a name, she was a rallying cry. Across Savannah and beyond, people flooded forums and community boards, sharing stories that echoed Naomi's ordeal. Moments where suspicion, prejudice, and fear overshadowed fairness and justice. Witnesses who had been at the park came forward, offering detailed eyewitness accounts of the incident. They described the sudden silence that fell over the scene, the collective gasp when Kessler's kick connected, and the growing outrage as Naomi was handcuffed before their eyes. Community leaders, civil rights activists, and clergy issued statements condemning the attack and calling for swift justice. They spoke of the larger implications, that Naomi's story was not an isolated event, but part of a systemic problem deeply rooted in racial bias and abuse of power. These voices galvanized neighborhoods, schools, and faith organizations to organize forums, rallies, and workshops aimed at raising awareness and demanding reform. Fundraisers sprung up almost overnight to support Naomi's legal battle and to provide resources for victims of police misconduct. Influencers used their platforms to amplify her story and to educate their followers about the ongoing crisis in policing. Traditional and social media began to merge in purpose, telling a story not just of an assault, but of a movement striving to reclaim dignity and justice. At the heart of this swell of support was an overwhelming sense of community. Strangers connected over shared outrage and a mutual desire to see change. The hashtag Justice for Naomi wasn't just trending, it was a call to arms, a beacon for those who had felt invisible and voiceless for too long. Among the emotional responses were heartfelt tributes from those who had worked alongside Naomi, acknowledging her decades of sacrifice and service. For many, the video was a painful reminder that badges and titles don't grant immunity from injustice. Naomi's quiet strength in the face of humiliation became a powerful image, inspiring countless individuals to speak out against similar injustices in their own lives. However, with the support came also a wave of anger and frustration. Many questioned how law enforcement agencies could allow officers like Kessler to remain on the force despite histories of complaints. Public pressure mounted on city officials to take immediate action, to investigate, suspend, and ultimately remove officers who abused their authority. This groundswell of public emotion became a turning point, forcing local government, police leadership, and the justice system to acknowledge the magnitude of the crisis. The incident was no longer just Naomi's story, it was the community's story, a reflection of widespread and the urgent demand for systemic change. The viral video's undeniable impact soon attracted the attention of mainstream media. News outlets from Savannah to national networks began to dedicate airtime to Naomi Pierce's story. It was no longer just a viral clip on social media. It had become a headline, a cause, and a symbol of the growing call for justice reform. Television news anchors covered the incident with urgency and gravitas, often leading with the raw footage and interviews from witnesses. Journalists dissected every detail of the event, offering analysis on what it revealed about broader issues within policing and civil rights. Naomi's identity as an FBI agent highlighting that even those trained in and sworn to uphold justice were vulnerable to discrimination and abuse. Legal experts and civil rights advocates were invited onto talk shows and panels to discuss the implications of the case. The discussion expanded beyond the single incident to focus on systemic racial profiling, the lack of accountability for officers with histories of misconduct, and the urgent need for reform. The story sparked a national dialogue about police culture, implicit bias, and the gaps in oversight that allowed abuses to continue unchecked. Local officials in Savannah scrambled to respond, issuing statements promising thorough investigations and cooperation with federal authorities. Yet, many community members saw these as hollow words, demanding transparency and real consequences. The media spotlight brought intense scrutiny to the police department's past records, unearthing long-ignored complaints and patterns of abuse. Inspired by Naomi's story, grassroots organizations mobilized quickly. Rallies, marches, and public forums filled the streets and community halls. Residents came together, demanding justice not only for Naomi, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. These gatherings were powerful and diverse, uniting people from different backgrounds around the shared goal of dismantling systemic injustice. Community leaders organized workshops to educate the public about their rights and to foster dialogue between law enforcement and residents. The energy was palpable, a mixture of grief, anger, and hope. The viral video had sparked not only outrage, but a movement, forcing difficult conversations and demanding accountability at every level. Police leadership found themselves under an unprecedented microphone. The pressure to enact reforms was immediate and relentless. The viral incident had pierced through layers of bureaucracy and complacency, catalyzing a process that many hoped would lead to real change. In the midst of this, Naomi remained a steadfast figure, no longer just the woman in the video, but the face of a growing struggle for justice. Her quiet strength, combined with the massive public support and media attention, created a moment of reckoning. What had started as a brutal act had become a powerful catalyst for awareness, advocacy, and the fight for systemic change. The video of Naomi Pierce's assault had shattered the silence, and now the Savannah Police Department faced an unavoidable reckoning. Within hours of the footage going viral, the department's leadership was forced into action. Internal Affairs immediately launched a formal investigation, a move long overdue but now impossible to ignore. The department publicly announced that officers Darren Kessler and Jaime Boyd were suspended without pay, pending a thorough inquiry into their conduct. For the police leadership, the situation was a crisis, spiraling out of control. Public confidence was waning by the minute, and the media storm showed no signs of abating. Press releases were drafted and redrafted, trying to balance promises of accountability with damage control. Yet, behind closed doors, officers and officials scrambled, some more concerned with protecting their institution's reputation than confronting the deep-rooted problems exposed by Naomi's arrest. Kessler, once a confident and unshakable figure in the department, now faced the harsh consequences of his actions. His suspension letter was delivered with cold finality. The weight of the scandal bore down on him visibly. Boyd, too, was reeling, the younger officer torn between loyalty, guilt, and the dawning realization of the part he played in a moment that would defy his career. Internal Affairs officers began combing through body cam footage, incident reports, and personnel files. Patterns emerged quickly. Kessler's record was blemished by multiple complaints over the years, mostly dismissed or quietly settled. These findings added fuel to the public fire, as the community questioned how someone with such a history had remained on active duty. The department's leadership recognized the urgent need for transparency. Public statements acknowledged past failures, promising a full and impartial review and cooperation with federal authorities. But many within the force bristled at the pressure, fearing the fallout could extend far beyond Kessler and Boyd. Outside, community leaders and activists watched closely. They knew this investigation was a test, not just for Kessler, but for the entire police department's willingness to accept responsibility and change. The eyes of Savannah, and indeed the nation, were fixed on how this internal reckoning would unfold. Amid the swirling crisis engulfing the Savannah Police Department, Captain Maria Ortega emerged as a pivotal figure. Ortega, a woman in her late 40s, her leadership style was firm but fair, the kind of leader who understood that true strength meant facing hard truths, even when they cut deep. When the scandal broke, Ortega was among the first in command to grasp the full gravity of the situation. Sitting alone in her office late one evening, she pored over the files that detailed Officer Kessler's record, multiple complaints of excessive force, all systematically dismissed or buried beneath bureaucratic indifference. She recognized a troubling pattern, one that wasn't just about Kessler's personal failings, but symptomatically Ortega's internal struggle was palpable. She had sworn an oath to protect and serve, but that duty now clashed with the realities of an institution marred by bias and silence. Behind closed doors, she spoke candidly with her colleagues and superiors, urging an honest reckoning. "We can't just sweep this under the rug," she said. "This goes deeper than one officer. It's a systemic problem." Her call for accountability wasn't universally welcomed. Several senior officers expressed skepticism or outright opposition, fearful that acknowledging such deep flaws would irreparably damage the department's reputation. Unions began to murmur about defending Kessler's, framing him as a scapegoat unfairly targeted. Yet Ortega stood firm, understanding that the department's survival depended on rebuilding trust with the community. A trust shattered by Naomi's arrest and the viral video that exposed the truth. Realizing the significance of Naomi Pierce's case, Ortega reached out personally. Their first meeting was cautious, underscored by mutual respect but tinged with the unspoken realities each faced. Ortega assured Naomi that she would have full cooperation and access to all departmental records. "I want you to know," Ortega said quietly, "that I'm here to support the truth, not just for you, but for everyone who has suffered in silence." This alliance sent ripples through the department. Some saw Ortega's stance as a brave commitment to reform. Others whispered that she was aligning with an outsider who threatened the established order. But Ortega's priority remained clear: to lead the department through a painful but necessary transformation. As the internal investigation intensified, Ortega oversaw the expansion of the inquiry to include other officers with questionable records, knowing that Kessler's actions were only the tip of the iceberg. She pushed for transparency in the process, advocating for public updates and community engagement. While this exposed her to criticism and professional risks, driven by a vision of policing that could one day be just and equitable. In the eye of the storm, Naomi Pierce remained the embodiment of controlled strength. The viral video had thrust her unwillingly into the spotlight, but unlike many who might succumb to anger or bitterness, Naomi channeled her emotions into measured, deliberate action. She understood that to dismantle a system entrenched in prejudice and denial, she had to be more than a symbol. She had to be a strategist. Naomi's days became a whirlwind of meetings with civil rights lawyers, policy advocates, and trusted advisors. Together, they crafted a multi-pronged plan to press for justice, pursuing legal action against Officer Kessler, leveraging media attention to highlight systemic issues, and building alliances with grassroots organizations dedicated to police reform. Despite her prominence, Naomi carefully managed her public appearances. She declined sensational interviews, focusing instead on carefully framed statements that emphasized accountability and reform over personal grievance. In press conferences and community forums, she spoke with a quiet authority, grounding her message or the lived experiences of countless individuals who, unlike her, lacked a badge or a platform. Yet the growing movement was met with fierce resistance. Police unions, eager to protect their members and preserve the status quo, mobilized swiftly. They launched campaigns to discredit Naomi, questioning her motives, painting her as a troublemaker or political opportunist. Anonymous social media accounts spread misinformation, aimed at undermining her credibility and sowing division within the community. This backlash was relentless, aimed not just at Naomi but at the broader push for reform. Union leaders held press briefings, emphasizing the challenges officers face and warning against anti-police sentiment. Attempts were made to label Naomi's supporters as radicals or outsiders. The rhetoric grew heated, further polarizing an already tense environment. In response, community activists galvanized their efforts. Town halls, rallies, and panel discussions sprang up across Savannah, with Naomi's story as a rallying point. Local pastors, educators, and civil rights advocates lent their voices, framing the struggle as a fight for dignity, fairness, and systemic change. Social media campaigns humanized the victims of profiling and abuse, countering the union's narrative with stories of real people impacted by institutional neglect. Naomi herself became a mentor to many, not just a public figure, but a source of guidance for activists, lawyers, and everyday citizens emboldened to speak out. Her calm, strategic approach inspired confidence and sustained momentum. She knew the road ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with political maneuvering and cultural resistance. But she also knew that change was possible if she and her allies remained steadfast. As the department's internal investigation progressed, amid mounting public scrutiny, Naomi balanced the pressure with grace. Her focus never wavered from the ultimate goal: systemic reform that would prevent others from suffering the humiliation and violence she endured. She remained a voice of reason and resilience, a quiet force driving a movement that was only beginning to grow. The atmosphere inside the federal courthouse was heavy with anticipation. After weeks of mounting evidence and public outrage, federal prosecutors had officially filed formal charges against Officer Darren Kessler. The charges were severe: assault and civil rights violations. These accusations represented a critical moment not only for the individuals involved, but also for the entire Savannah community and the nation at large. For Naomi Pierce, the filing of charges was a validation of everything she had endured. It was a sign that her voice had been heard, that her suffering mattered, and that the system might finally acknowledge the abuses that had been ignored for so long. But even as relief settled in, Naomi understood the road ahead would be long, arduous, and fraught with challenges. The federal prosecutors wasted no time. Preliminary hearings were scheduled swiftly, emphasizing the urgency of addressing the case. These hearings were to serve as the legal gateway, determining if there was enough evidence to move forward to trial. Given the national attention the case had garnered, every step was scrutinized by the public and media alike. The courtroom became a focal point of the city's attention. Journalists filled the hallways, setting up cameras and preparing questions for the key players. Activists gathered outside, holding signs and chanting, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes. For many, this was more than a legal proceeding. It was a battle for justice and recognition of systemic problems within law enforcement. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutors presented their case with careful precision. They laid out the timeline of the incident piece by piece, supported by video footage, witness testimonies, and internal police records revealing a pattern of misconduct by Kessler. Their argument was clear. Kessler's actions were not isolated errors but symptomatic of a deeper culture of abuse and unchecked authority. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, worked to frame Kessler's behavior in a different light. They portrayed him as a dedicated officer facing the pressures of a demanding job, someone who made an unfortunate mistake in a high-stress situation. Their narrative aimed to humanize Kessler and cast doubt on the prosecution's accusations of racial bias and deliberate wrongdoing. As the courtroom filled with tension, the video evidence captured by bystanders played on the large screen. The stark reality of Kessler's aggressive actions and Naomi's calm compliance was undeniable. Gasps and whispers swept through the courtroom as jurors absorbed the weight of the images. The filing of charges sent ripples far beyond the courthouse walls. Inside the Savannah Police Department, the mood was tense. Officers exchanged hushed conversations, uncertain about the implications. Kessler, once confident and unshaken, now appeared guarded and distant. The badge and uniform that once commanded authority now felt like a heavy burden, a symbol of a career on the brink. For Naomi, the charges marked the start of a new phase. The fight was no longer just about her personal dignity. It was about confronting a broken system and demanding accountability. As the case progressed, she steeled herself for the battle ahead, knowing the courtroom would become a stage where every word and gesture mattered. Behind closed doors, Naomi's preparation for testifying in federal court became her full-time focus. While accustomed to pressure from years as an FBI agent, this was unlike anything she had experienced before. She was no longer the one wielding power, but the one bearing witness to injustice, forced to relive moments of trauma under the unforgiving eyes of a judge, jury, and the entire nation. Each day began early, with Naomi diving into the details of the incident. She reviewed video footage repeatedly, memorized timelines, and rehearsed her testimony with her legal team. The goal was clear: to remain composed and factual, to present her experience with unwavering clarity and strength. Her legal counsel guided her through the process, preparing her for the tactics defense attorneys would use to challenge her credibility. They simulated cross-examinations, helping her anticipate questions designed to provoke doubt or paint her in a negative light. Naomi embraced the challenge, understanding that her calm and conviction could be her most powerful weapons. Support systems became vital during this intense period. Harper, Naomi's supervisor, was a steady presence, offering encouragement and ensuring she had access to counseling and peer support. Colleagues in the FBI rallied behind her, reminding her that she was not alone. and that the agency stood in solidarity. Emotionally, the preparation was draining. Late nights were often filled with silent reflection, memories of the kick, the harsh metal cuffs biting into her wrists, and the public humiliation swirling through her mind. Yet she refused to let anger or fear consume her. Instead, she transformed these feelings into resolve, a fuel to carry her through the trial. Naomi reminded herself daily that this was not only her fight, but a stand for countless others who faced abuse without a platform. She wasn't pursuing personal vengeance. She sought systemic change, justice for those whose voices were silenced. Despite the external pressures, Naomi maintained her strategic calm. She learned the power of measured words and deliberate pauses. Every statement would be recorded, analyzed, and replayed, so she committed herself to precision. Her testimony would not only recount facts, but also send a message about dignity, resilience, and accountability. The community's support provided additional strength. Messages poured in from friends, activists, and strangers moved by her story. These words of encouragement reminded her that the case transcended her individual experience and touched a nerve nationwide. Yet, with support came threats. The darker side of public attention revealed itself in intimidating messages and attempts to undermine her credibility. Naomi faced these challenges with quiet determination, knowing that speaking the truth often came with risks. Her preparation extended beyond legal strategy. She engaged with civil rights organizations, policy advocates, and community leaders to align efforts for justice. This coalition Mila was essential, positioning Naomi not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for meaningful reform. When the trial commenced, the courtroom was charged with an electric mix of hope, anger, and the collective weight of justice. Reporters, activists, legal experts, and community members packed the galleries, their presence a constant reminder that this case carried significance far beyond the individuals involved. Opening statements set the stage. The prosecuting lead delivered a compelling narrative, emphasizing the abuse of power and systemic racism exposed by the assault on Naomi. They argued that Kessler's actions were not isolated, but reflected a broader culture of unchecked authority and racial bias within law enforcement. Their words were measured yet forceful, carefully constructed to highlight both legal violations and moral failures. In response, the defense painted a contrasting picture. They portrayed Kessler as a hard-working officer operating under immense stress in a high-crime area, suggesting the incident was a regrettable misunderstanding rather than a deliberate attack. This narrative aimed to evoke sympathy and raise doubts about the prosecution's claims. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented damning evidence. The bystander videos, official complaints against Kessler, and witness testimonies painted a clear picture of misconduct. The jury's attention was rapt as each piece of evidence dismantled the defense's claims. Outside the courthouse, the community mobilized. Demonstrators gathered daily, holding signs that called for justice, chanting Naomi's name, and demanding systemic reform. Their presence was both a show of solidarity and a reminder to those inside the courtroom that the eyes of the public were watching closely. Naomi, despite exhaustion, drew strength from this support. Messages of encouragement and shared stories poured in from across the country. But there were also warnings, threats, and attempts to intimidate those fighting for change. The stark realities underscored the high stakes of the trial. Community leaders organized forums and discussions, using Naomi's story to reignite conversations about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the urgent need for accountability. These efforts helped shift the narrative from a single event to a broader societal problem demanding action. Inside the courtroom, tension mounted as the defense struggled to counter the mounting evidence. The video footage and consistent witness accounts made their arguments appear increasingly hollow. The courtroom's atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day, signaling the momentum was with the prosecution. For Naomi, the trial was both a crucible and a platform. Her testimony was not just about recounting her experience, but about giving voice to countless others silenced by injustice. She was determined to use this moment to push for accountability and reform. The battle was far from over, but with each step forward, the hope for justice and change grew stronger, both within the courtroom walls and throughout the community rallying outside. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. As Naomi Pierce rose from her seat to take the witness stand, every eye followed her measured steps. Despite the weight of the moment, Naomi's posture was poised and unyielding, a figure of strength shaped by decades in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The crowd, a mix of reporters, legal professionals, and local citizens, felt the palpable tension that accompanied the unfolding of a truth too long silenced. Swearing to tell the truth, Naomi began recounting her experience with deliberate clarity. Her voice was steady, each word pronounced with the confidence that only comes from knowing one's own truth. She painted a vivid picture of the afternoon in Savannah, the calm park, golden light filtering through towering oaks, children laughing in the distance, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. It was a setting that should have been peaceful and ordinary, yet it was the backdrop for an act of profound injustice. Naomi detailed Officer Kessler's sudden intrusion, his harsh questioning, the suspicion that lingered not because of her actions, but because of assumptions based on the color of her skin and her solitary presence. She described the moment she complied with his demand for identification, handing over her credentials with care, yet felt his dismissal of her FBI badge like a slap in the face. The narrative intensified as she recounted how Kessler had invaded her personal space, rifled through her bag without permission, and then, without warning, kicked her shoulder, sending her stumbling. Her testimony was more than a chronological recounting. It was an indictment of systemic bias. She conveyed the internal conflict of remaining calm amid humiliation, the calculated restraint that was necessary not just to protect herself, but to ensure that her story would be heard in full. Naomi's tone was devoid of anger, but filled with a quiet fury that struck a chord with everyone present. The jury absorbed her words, the weight of her experience settling deeply. Many in the audience were visibly moved, some blinking back tears, others nodding in solemn acknowledgement. The judge watched intently, his expression grave, as Naomi's testimony laid bare not only the specifics of the assault, but also the larger context of racial profiling and abuse of power. Kessler sat silently at the defense table, his earlier arrogance now replaced with a subtle unease. Each detail Naomi shared chipped away at his credibility and exposed the truth behind his actions. When Naomi concluded, she stepped down with dignity, the courtroom still held captive by the resonance of her words. Immediately following Naomi's testimony, the prosecution shifted gears, calling forth the irrefutable evidence that would anchor their case. The first to be displayed was the raw body camera footage from Officer Kessler's patrol unit. The courtroom's large screen flickered to life, revealing the tense encounter in the park, Kessler's approach, his confrontational tone, the illustrations Naomi's belongings, and the unmistakable moment. The grainy footage was visceral and unfiltered. The jury watched in silence, as Naomi maintained composure despite Kessler's aggression, a striking contrast to the officer's escalating hostility. The visual evidence corroborated every detail of Naomi's testimony, making it impossible to deny the reality of the. Adding to the narrative were videos captured by bystanders, citizens who had witnessed the incident firsthand and recorded it on their phones. Multiple perspectives showed the shock and disbelief of those nearby, their gasps and murmurs echoing through the courtroom's sound system. The presence of these everyday witnesses underscored the public nature of the abuse and the shared sense of outrage it had sparked. The prosecution then introduced internal police documents that exposed a disturbing pattern. Kessler was no stranger to complaints. The files revealed a trail of allegations concerning excessive force and racial bias that had been repeatedly ignored or dismissed by the department. These reports unveiled systemic failures within the police force, painting Kessler not as a lone offender, but as a symptom of a broader institutional problem. The defense attorneys attempted to shift focus, portraying Kessler as a man under stress, acting in a high-pressure environment. They argued that the footage was ambiguous, and that Kessler's actions were misunderstandings rather than deliberate misconduct. However, their arguments fell short against the overwhelming evidence and the mounting testimony. Witnesses from the local community added emotional depth, sharing their perspectives and recounting the impact of Kessler's behavior on their trust in law enforcement. Their voices personalized the systemic issues, reminding the courtroom that this was not just a legal case, but a human story with wide-reaching consequences. As the evidence concluded, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The prosecution's case was compelling and comprehensive, leaving little room for doubt. The jury's focus sharpened, recognizing that the scales of justice were tipping decisively. After days of intense testimony and evidence presentation, the courtroom braced for the final moment. The jurors re-entered, their faces serious and composed, carrying the weight of their decision. Naomi sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap, her mind steady but alert. The gravity of this day was undeniable. Justice awaited. The judge called the court to order and invited the jury foreperson to deliver the verdict. Every person in the room leaned forward in anticipation. "We, the jury, find Darren Kessler guilty on all counts," the foreperson declared with unwavering clarity. The courtroom reacted instantly. Gasps of relief mingled with whispered affirmations. Some spectators cried quietly, overwhelmed by the long-awaited acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Naomi's expression was composed but deeply moving, a mixture of solemnity and quiet triumph. This was a victory against a system that had tried to silence her and countless others. Kessler's composure crumbled. The arrogance that once defined him was stripped away, leaving a man who now understood the full consequences of his actions. His hands clenched, his head bowed in defeat, as the verdict echoed through the chambers. The judge addressed the court with authority. Considering the severity of these offenses and the breach of public trust, the court sentences Darren Kessler to 4 years in federal prison. With no eligibility for parole, his voice was firm and resolute, signaling zero tolerance for abuse of power, especially motivated by racial bias. The defense team exchanged glances, the weight of the sentence sinking in. The decision sent a powerful message. The era of unchecked police misconduct was being challenged, and accountability was non-negotiable. Guards approached Kessler, handcuffing him and leading him out of the courtroom. The transition from officer to convict was dramatic and unmistakable. Naomi watched with a sense of calm resolve, understanding that this was a milestone, not the conclusion. Her thoughts shifted to what lay ahead: systemic reforms, continued advocacy, and the countless others who lacked her voice or credentials. The courtroom drama had concluded, but the journey toward justice was far from over. Outside, supporters gathered, their faces illuminated by a shared sense of hope and determination. Naomi had become a symbol not just of survival, but of change. Her courage inspired a community and sparked renewed calls for transparency and reform. As Naomi exited the courthouse, she moved with purposeful steps, ready to face the challenges ahead. This chapter of resistance was closed, but the story of justice was just beginning. In the weeks that followed the courtroom verdict, Naomi Pierce emerged not just as a figure of justice, but as a beacon of healing for a community long fractured by mistrust and pain. The courtroom victory had been monumental. Kessler's conviction sent a powerful message, but Naomi understood that true justice extended far beyond a single case. It was about the lives left shaken, the wounds left raw, and the need for the community to begin the difficult work of healing. Naomi began speaking at public forums and community gatherings throughout Savannah and the surrounding areas. These were spaces unlike the courtroom, informal yet deeply charged with emotion, where neighbors and activists shared stories that had too often gone unheard. Expiring survivors recounted their experiences, voices trembling but unyielding. Family members spoke of loved ones lost or traumatized by encounters that were brushed off or ignored by the system. Every forum was a mosaic of pain and hope. Naomi listened intently as much as she spoke, recognizing the immense courage it took for people to stand up and share their stories. She would begin with her own, the assault, the arrest, the humiliation, but quickly shifted the focus to the many others whose stories had never made headline. The atmosphere at these events was heavy with grief, but also charged with possibility. Tears flowed freely, and so did voices demanding change. Naomi encouraged open dialogue, fostering spaces where honest conversations about race, policing, and justice could unfold without fear or judgment. These forums were not just about airing grievances. They became incubators of community resilience. Naomi emphasized the power of collective storytelling, how truth could shatter the cycles of silence and denial. She urged every person to become an advocate, a witness, a guardian of justice in their own circles. Healing begins when we name our pain, she told the crowd, and transformation happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. She also called on law enforcement officials willing to listen and learn, inviting them into the conversation to build bridges where walls once stood. It was raw and at times confrontational, but necessary. Naomi knew that reconciliation could never be rushed. It required patience, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Through these public forums, Naomi witnessed something remarkable. Communities bound together not just by shared suffering, but by a shared determination to rebuild and reclaim trust. The process of healing was just beginning, but for the first time in years, many felt seen, heard, and hopeful. While community healing gathered momentum, Naomi's vision extended into action, concrete, strategic, and sustained. She realized that to dismantle the systemic roots of police abuse, she needed to build a lasting institution dedicated to legal advocacy and reform. From this conviction, the Justice Forward initiative was born. Justice Forward was more than a legal aid group. It was a comprehensive movement to empower victims of police misconduct and challenge abusive systems head-on. Naomi leveraged her extensive network within the FBI, civil rights organizations, and legal communities to assemble a team of passionate lawyers, investigators, and social justice advocates. Within the first 3 months, Justice Forward opened offices not only in Savannah, but also in Atlanta, Charleston, and other cities where patterns of abuse had gone unchecked. The initiative prioritized accessibility, offering free legal representation to individuals wrongfully detained, abused, or discriminated against by law enforcement. They also provided education on legal rights and practical advice on how to navigate the justice system. Naomi emphasized rigorous training for all volunteers. Attorneys were equipped not just with legal expertise, but with an understanding of systemic racism, implicit bias, and the psychological toll of police violence on communities. Workshops focused on trauma-informed legal defense, helping clients heal even as their cases moved forward. Justice Forward also fostered partnerships with grassroots organizations, community centers, and advocacy groups. Recognizing that justice was intertwined with broader social issues, housing, education, healthcare, Naomi sought to create holistic support networks for victims and their families. The launch attracted national attention. Media coverage highlighted Naomi's shift from individual survivor to institutional changemaker. Justice Forward became a model for a new kind of civil rights organization, one that combined legal rigor with community collaboration, grassroots activism with policy advocacy. Naomi saw the initiative as her legacy, a vehicle for systemic change that could outlast any one case or individual. Her determination was clear: to build infrastructure strong enough to challenge entrenched power and ensure that future Naomi Pierces would have a fighting chance, not just in courtrooms, but in their everyday lives. Naomi's work with Justice Forward soon expanded into the realm of law enforcement reform itself. She knew that true progress required changing the culture within police departments, the attitudes, training, and accountability structures that allowed abuse to fester. Partnering with city officials, police leadership, and reform-minded stakeholders, Naomi spearheaded the development of an innovative training program focused on addressing racial bias and promoting ethical, de-escalational-centered policing. This curriculum combined scientific research on implicit bias with hard-hitting real-world examples, including detailed case studies from Naomi's own experience. The program's core message was clear: policing was a human endeavor, fraught with unconscious prejudices that needed recognition and management. Officers were trained to identify moments when bias might influence their decisions and taught practical communication skills to diffuse tension without force. City officials were initially cautious, concerned about political fallout and resistance from police unions, but mounting public pressure, combined with Naomi's relentless advocacy, made reform inevitable. After months of negotiations and pilot programs, the city adopted mandatory bias awareness training for all officers, integrated into annual certification requirements. Complementing the training were significant policy reforms: introduction of independent civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, transparent complaint tracking systems, and strict disciplinary protocols for violations. Naomi worked closely with lawmakers to codify these measures into law, ensuring they were more than just recommendations. The effects were subtle but powerful. Officers who underwent the training reported greater empathy and improved community relations. Complaints against police began to decline in some precincts, and trust, while still fragile, showed signs of rebuilding. Public education campaigns, organized by Justice Forward in collaboration with local media, helped communities understand their rights and encouraged open dialogue with law enforcement. Naomi often spoke at city council meetings, reminding officials that reform was a long-term commitment, requiring vigilance. Through these efforts, Naomi positioned herself not just as a survivor of injustice, but as a key architect of transformative change. The fight was far from over, but the landscape was shifting, and with it, the promise of a more just future. While leading systemic reform, Naomi never lost sight of the importance of nurturing future generations. She embraced mentorship as a vital extension of her mission, knowing that lasting change required a new cadre of passionate, informed advocates. Naomi regularly visited law schools, community organizations, and advocacy groups, sharing her story with a candor that resonated deeply. She spoke about the realities of systemic injustice, the necessity of resilience, and the power of strategic, patient advocacy. Her talks were more than inspirational, they were blueprints for effective activism. She mentored young attorneys, helping them navigate the complexities of civil rights litigation, and encouraged activists to channel outrage into sustainable campaigns. Many of her mentees went on to take leadership roles in legal aid organizations, nonprofit advocacy, and policy reform initiatives. Naomi emphasized the importance of collaboration across disciplines and communities. She encouraged the young advocates to build coalitions, bridging divides between legal professionals, grassroots activists, educators, and affected communities. "No one fights alone," she would say, "and no change happens without unity." Despite offers for high-profile media appearances, book deals, and even political candidacies, Naomi remained focused on impact over fame. Her mission was clear: build a legacy that empowered others, broke cycles of injustice, and created enduring institutions. In quiet moments, Naomi reflected on how far the movement had come, from a single viral video of an assault to sweeping legal reforms and grassroots empowerment. She understood that the path ahead would be long and challenging, but she also knew that the seeds planted now would bear fruit for decades to come. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every person who had been wronged, every community that had been silenced. And as she mentored the next generation, Naomi was confident that the fight for justice would continue, stronger, wiser, and more relentless than ever. The reforms Naomi Pierce had fought tirelessly to advance soon met a powerful wall of resistance. Police unions, known for their influence and staunch defense of their members, mobilized swiftly and decisively. They launched campaigns painting the reforms as attacks on law enforcement, branding Naomi's efforts as divisive and unfair. Press releases, op-eds, and social media blitzes flooded local news outlets. Political figures, some newly elected and eager to curry favor with union leaders, began to echo these criticisms. They questioned the necessity of the sweeping changes, suggesting that incidents like Naomi's were isolated and did not justify upending long-standing policies. Behind closed doors, negotiations commenced to dilute the reform bills before they could pass into law. Amendments were proposed to weaken oversight provisions, limit the power of civilian review boards, and protect officers from disciplinary actions. Despite the growing pressure, Naomi remained unwavering. She understood that resistance was inevitable when entrenched interests felt threatened. But the tactics of opposition extended beyond policy debates. Personal attacks surfaced, aiming to discredit her character and question her motives. Rumors and misinformation spread to paint her as an outsider meddling in local affairs, despite her decades of service and roots in the community. Naomi recognized that these battles were about more than legislation. They were about controlling the narrative. To counteract this, she redoubled her efforts to engage directly with lawmakers, community leaders, and the public. She held town hall meetings, spoke at city council sessions, and provided clear, factual updates on reform progress. She emphasized the human stories behind the statistics, the lives impacted by unchecked police power, and the urgent need for accountability. While the opposition was fierce and organized, Naomi found strength in the growing chorus of voices demanding change. Local activists, clergy, and civic groups rallied behind her, amplifying her message and providing critical support in the face of political pushback. The battle for reform had entered a new phase, and Naomi was ready to face it head-on. The intense pressure of leading a public fight for justice began to weigh heavily on Naomi. The spotlight was unrelenting, and the stakes felt higher every day. Burnout crept in slowly, disguised as fatigue and occasional moments of doubt. Threatening messages appeared anonymously, both online and in person. She received letters containing veiled warnings, unsettling phone calls, and even late-night knocks at her door. The psychological toll was undeniable. Yet Naomi refused to be cowed. She leaned on her close-cleared support network, family, longtime friends, and trusted colleagues within the FBI. Their steady presence was a lifeline. They provided emotional grounding, reminding her of why she had chosen this path in the first place. Quiet conversations over coffee, long walks to clear her mind, and moments of shared laughter became precious sanctuaries amid the storm. Naomi also prioritized self-care in practical ways. She carved out time for exercise, meditation, and reading. At times, the personal sacrifices felt overwhelming. Social invitations were declined, family gatherings postponed, and personal downtime sacrificed. Yet even in those moments, Naomi drew strength from the knowledge that her work had real impact. Letters from victims and their families, notes of thanks from community members, and the growing momentum of reform fueled her determination. She became acutely aware that her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to a movement. That realization sharpened her focus and deepened her resolve. Naomi knew the path forward would be long and fraught, but she also understood that true change demanded endurance, courage, and unwavering commitment. As the reform efforts gained national attention, Naomi faced an increasingly complex media landscape. While many outlets covered the story with fairness and empathy, others engaged in misinformation campaigns designed to confuse and divide. Sensationalist headlines misrepresented her statements, casting doubt on her credibility and framing the narrative as a conflict rather than a call for justice. Social media became a battleground. Troll accounts amplified falsehoods and conspiracy theories, questioning Naomi's motives and attempting to paint her as a radical agitator. Deepfake videos and misleading clips circulated, sowing confusion among the public. The volume and velocity of misinformation threatened to overshadow the real issues at stake. Naomi, ever strategic, knew that controlling the narrative was crucial. She worked closely with communication experts to craft clear, consistent messaging that cut through the noise. Her public statements were carefully measured but powerful, emphasizing facts, human stories, and the urgent need for systemic reform. She used platforms like Twitter and Instagram to connect directly with supporters, bypassing traditional media filters. Recognizing the importance of education, Naomi helped organize media literacy workshops for community members. She encouraged people to question sources, verify facts, and resist the allure of viral misinformation. Her message was simple but profound. Truth was a weapon against deception. Despite the challenges, Naomi's calm, transparent approach earned respect from many journalists and influencers. Her willingness to engage openly, acknowledge complexities, and stay focused on justice helped maintain public trust. Gradually, the tide began to shift, as more voices joined her in rejecting misinformation and demanding accountability. The media challenges were daunting, but Naomi's resilience and strategic communication ensured that the truth remained front and center, an essential foundation for the ongoing fight. Amidst the resistance and media battles, Naomi found renewed strength in solidarity. Community rallies swelled, drawing people from all walks of life, young and old, Black, white, Latino, Asian, and more. The streets echoed with chants for justice, banners raised high proclaiming accountability now. Unexpected allies emerged. Faith leaders who had once remained silent stepped forward to lend their voices. Local business owners joined marches, recognizing that safe, equitable communities were good for everyone. Even some law enforcement officers who believed in reform quietly reached out to Naomi, offering support and insider perspectives. These alliances forged a powerful network of change-makers, united by a shared commitment to dismantle systemic injustice. They organized voter registration drives, community forums, and educational panels. Naomi often spoke at these events, reminding people that real change required both grassroots energy and sustained institutional pressure. Solidarity wasn't just public, it was personal. Naomi's support system expanded beyond family and colleagues to include a broad coalition of advocates who provided encouragement and practical assistance. When threats escalated, it was this network that ensured her safety and well-being. The energy of solidarity transformed the movement from a reactionary response to an enduring force. It created a sense of hope and possibility, inspiring others to step forward and take action. Naomi saw in this collective strength the true promise of justice, a future built not on fear or division, but on unity and courage. Naomi Pierce's story had transcended local headlines and become a beacon of hope and a rallying cry for justice across the nation. Invitations poured in from all corners: conferences, national forums, policy summits, places where voices demanding reform could be heard loud and clear. Naomi accepted with a quiet resolve, understanding the weight of the platform she'd been given. At each event, she spoke not just about her own experience, but about the countless others whose stories remained untold. Her presence commanded attention. She wore no dramatic flair. Simple suits, clear eyes, steady voice. But every word carried the power of truth. Audiences listened as she outlined the urgent need for systemic change in law enforcement, emphasizing that reform was not an abstract ideal, but a matter of life and death for many communities. National media began profiling Naomi as one of the most influential voices in police accountability. Feature articles in major newspapers described her journey from federal agent to reluctant symbol of a movement. Television interviews highlighted her calm strength and strategic mindset. Social media amplified her words, turning her into a figure who represented resilience and hope. But Naomi was careful to keep the focus where it belonged, on the issue, not on herself. She repeatedly emphasized that this fight was about more than one incident or one person. It was about uprooting centuries of injustice and building a system that served all people equally. This humility, paired with fierce conviction, earned her respect from leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. Despite the increased visibility, Naomi remained grounded. She knew that national attention was a double-edged sword, capable of inspiring change, but also inviting scrutiny and fatigue. Still, with every speech and every interview, she pushed forward, determined to keep the spotlight on police reform and to ensure that momentum did not wane. Naomi's evolving role soon extended beyond advocacy into direct policy influence. Lawmakers seeking to address police misconduct and systemic bias recognized her expertise and invited her to participate in legislative discussions. Her first-hand experience and strategic insights proved invaluable in shaping bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. In closed-door meetings on Capitol Hill, Naomi articulated the practical realities behind the reforms. She spoke of the need for clear protocols in stops and searches, mandatory body cameras with strict usage policies, and independent oversight committees empowered to investigate complaints without bias. Her knowledge of federal investigations lent credibility and urgency to the proposals. The push for reform gained momentum, buoyed by Naomi's involvement and the growing public demand for change. Bills addressing police training in implicit bias, use of force limitations, and public reporting requirements advanced through committees. Naomi worked closely with bipartisan groups, bridging divides by focusing on shared goals of safety, justice, and trust. Her ability to navigate the political landscape was a testament to her experience and character. She remained focused on results, resisting the allure of political grandstanding. For Naomi, policy was the tool through which real lives could be protected and dignity restored. She often reminded lawmakers that behind every statistic was a human being, a mother, a child, a neighbor. While challenges persisted, including pushback from powerful lobbies and competing interests, Naomi's steady presence and clear message helped maintain progress. She advocated for laws that were not merely symbolic but enforceable, designed to create lasting change rather than temporary fixes. Throughout it all, Naomi collaborated with civil rights organizations, legal experts, and community leaders, ensuring that the voices of those most affected were heard in policy debates. Her leadership helped shift the conversation from crisis response to sustainable reform. Parallel to her national advocacy, Naomi expanded her work on the ground by growing the legal aid network she had founded earlier. Originally a local initiative, Justice Forward evolved into a multi-state effort, providing critical resources to individuals and families facing police misconduct and wrongful detainment. New offices opened in major cities across the country, staffed by passionate volunteer attorneys, social workers, and community organizers trained in recognizing systemic bias and legal defense strategies. The network became a lifeline for many who otherwise lacked access to justice. From urban centers to rural towns, Justice Forward brought hope and practical assistance to marginalized populations. Naomi spearheaded comprehensive training programs designed to equip community leaders, activists, and legal professionals with the tools necessary to navigate the complex legal system. Workshops covered topics such as citizens' rights during police encounters, documentation techniques, and advocacy for policy change. These trainings fostered empowered communities capable of standing up for themselves and holding law enforcement accountable. Partnerships with universities, nonprofits, and advocacy groups broadened the network's reach and impact. Naomi worked tirelessly to secure funding, promote public awareness, and create a culture of transparency and accountability. She believed that sustainable change required empowering people at the grassroots level. The success stories began to multiply. Individuals once silenced found their voices. Families received legal support that prevented unjust outcomes. Communities saw incremental but meaningful improvements in policing practices. Naomi's quiet leadership was the catalyst for a movement that extended far beyond the courtroom or the halls of power. The growth of Justice Forward was both a personal triumph and a collective victory, embodying the spirit of resilience and justice that Naomi had fought so hard to ignite. Naomi's influence continued to inspire a new generation of justice advocates. Her story, marked by courage and relentless pursuit of accountability, became a beacon of hope for those disillusioned by systemic failures. She remained a steady, calming presence, never seeking the limelight, but never shying away from it when it served the cause. Communities across the nation shared stories of transformation sparked by Naomi's example. Young activists credited her for giving them the courage to speak out. Lawyers and public defenders found renewed purpose in their work. Families affected by police violence felt seen and supported. Naomi took pride not in accolades or headlines, but in the tangible changes she witnessed. A community forum where honest dialogue replaced fear. A local police department adopting new training protocols. A teenager released from unjust detention thanks to legal aid. These moments, small and large, were victories in a long struggle. She continued to mentor emerging leaders, guiding them with wisdom and humility. Naomi emphasized that change was a marathon, not a sprint, requiring patience, resilience, and unwavering dedication. She encouraged others to keep fighting, reminding them that every voice mattered. Through every challenge, Naomi's quiet leadership radiated strength and hope. Her journey illuminated the path toward a more just society, one where accountability was not the exception but the norm. The movement she helped shape was no longer confined to headlines. It had become a living, breathing force for change. The afternoon sun was soft and warm as Naomi Pierce walked slowly through the familiar Savannah Park, the place where her ordeal had begun months before. The worn bench she approached had weathered countless seasons, just like her. She paused for a moment, her hand brushing the roughened wood, a quiet symbol of endurance and resilience. Sitting down, Naomi let herself sink into the moment, the gentle rustling of leaves and distant laughter. Her mind drifted back through the whirlwind of the last few months. The initial shock of the assault, the cold cuffs digging into her wrists, the sterile walls of the substation where she'd been held. But beyond those moments of pain, she remembered the courage she found within herself, a strength she hadn't realized was there until tested. The viral video that had exposed not only an officer's brutality, but a systemic issue that had long been ignored. The wave of support that rose from community rallies, the thousands of voices chanting for change. Naomi's thoughts moved to the countless people whose stories mirrored hers, but never made headline. The faces behind statistics, the quiet suffering concealed by bureaucracy. This movement was not about her alone. It was about every person who had been pushed to the margins by assumptions and prejudice. Sitting there, she reflected on her own growth, not just as an agent or advocate, but as a person transformed by this fight. She felt the heavy weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of hope. The road ahead remained long and uncertain, but the first steps had been taken, and she was no longer alone. Around her, life in the park moved on. Decks paddled in the pond, parents pushed strollers, and the wind whispered through the branches. But Naomi knew that for her, this place would forever be sacred. It was the site of loss and reclamation, a starting point for the journey to justice. Naomi's journey was no longer solitary. It had sparked a fire that now burned in the hearts of a new generation of leaders and advocates who looked to her not just for guidance, but for inspiration. These young voices, passionate and determined, carried the energy of a movement eager to dismantle systemic injustice. She met with these leaders often, at community centers, informal gatherings, and quiet meetings filled with earnest conversation and powerful ideas. Their faces were bright with hope, their questions sharp and insightful. Naomi listened intently as they spoke of strategies, challenges, and the vision for a future built on fairness and respect. Their presence was a reminder that the fight for justice was not hers alone, but a collective endeavor spanning generations. In one memorable moment, Naomi found herself crouching beside a young girl clutching a notebook, much like she had done years ago. The child's eyes sparkled with the same fierce determination Naomi remembered in herself. Encouraging the girl to keep writing, keep telling stories, Naomi understood that this was the true legacy of her experience, the empowerment of others to carry the cause forward. The young leaders organized forums and workshops, took the stage at local schools, and brought new energy to old struggles. Naomi was proud, not of her own victories, but of the strength blossoming in those she had touched. This passing of the torch was more than symbolic. It was essential. The movement depended on fresh perspectives and relentless passion. As she watched these advocates step boldly into roles of leadership, Naomi felt a quiet satisfaction. Her role was evolving from frontline fighter to mentor, guide, and witness. The fight would continue, but it would do so with many voices, many hands, and a powerful collective spirit that could not be extinguished. At a packed community event, Naomi stood before a diverse crowd, the weight of their hopes resting on her steady shoulders. She wasn't here to share a victim's tale, but to issue a call to arms, a plea for unity, persistence, and unwavering commitment to justice. Justice, Naomi began, her voice calm yet resonant, is not something we achieve in a day or with a single victory. It is a continuous effort, a shared responsibility that requires courage from all of us. The crowd was silent, hanging on her words, feeling the urgency behind them. She spoke of accountability, of holding systems and individuals responsible, but also of healing and rebuilding. Our work isn't just about fighting injustice. It's about creating communities where respect and dignity are the foundation, where no one fears the uniform meant to protect them. Her message transcended anger. It was about hope, resilience, and collective power. Naomi urged the audience to engage deeply, attend meetings, educate themselves on their rights, support those who stand up, and never accept silence as peace. When we unite our voices, our strength multiplies. This is how change begins. One step, one action, one voice at a time. Her words ignited a spark. The crowd responded with applause, not polite, but passionate, affirming a shared resolve. Naomi's call to action was an invitation, not a demand, to become part of a movement bigger than any one person, fueled by truth and unyielding determination. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable force promising that this fight, though hard, was far from over. Naomi's message was clear. The time to act was now, and together they could reshape the future. As the event drew to a close, a montage of scenes played, families gathering in solidarity, community leaders sharing stories, police and citizens engaging in dialogue, neighborhoods rebuilding trust. The visuals were a testament to the slow but steady progress taking root. Naomi watched quietly, a gentle smile breaking across her face. The work ahead was daunting, but the seeds of change had been planted deep. The future shimmered with possibility, fueled by a growing movement committed to justice, equity, and healing. She thought of the young girl with the notebook, the teenager once wrongfully detained now organizing peers for change, the seasoned advocates building bridges between communities and law enforcement. Together, they embodied a resilience that promised a new chapter. Rising from the bench, Naomi felt the sun's warmth as a symbol of renewal and hope. Her voice echoed softly, a whisper turned anthem. We will keep fighting, we will keep building, and one day, justice will no longer be a distant dream, but a reality for all. The screen faded to the Justice Forward logo, accompanied by contact information and a final call to action, inviting viewers to join, support, and stand together for a better tomorrow. From the solitude of a park bench to the front lines of a nationwide movement, Naomi's story had come full circle, an enduring testament to courage, resilience, and the power of collective change.